Okay, so we're going to do a one-way ANOVA from start to finish, starting with the data and going all the way through to the end where we evaluate the F ratio and draw some conclusions. So in this particular study, let's assume that we're looking at the effect of time of day on attention. So we bring a bunch of people into the lab, we randomly assign them to 3 p.m. or 3 a.m., and then we give them some basic test of attention and we count up the number of mistakes they make. So you can see here's the data. At 3 p.m., there's the mistakes, and at 3 a.m., here's the mistakes. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to summarize our data. All right, so, oops, why is this not working? I have no idea. Okay. All right, so capital A1, which is the sum of this column, capital A1 is 84. NA1 is 7. There's 7 items in this column. And Y bar A1, or the mean, is 12. Moving into the next column, capital A2 is 98. NA2 is 7. And Y bar A2 is 14. All right, and as always with these videos, I encourage you, rather than just copying down my answers, I encourage you to actually pause it, do the calculations yourself, and then bring it back up and see if you're getting the same answers as I am. All right, so the other thing that we need to do in terms of summarizing before we move on to our calculations is we need to get little a by itself, which is the number of groups or the number of levels, and in this case we have 2 groups. We need little n by itself, which is the number of subjects per group. And in this case, it's 7. Remember, I said this before, in the real world, you could have unequal n, but when we do this on the board, we're always going to have an equal number of n. We have capital T. Remember, capital letters refer to sums, and capital T is the grand sum, so it's the sum of all 14 scores. If you trust your math, you can just add capital A1 and capital A2, and that equals 182. And then I'm out of room here. Y bar T is the grand mean, which is the mean of all the scores. So it's all these added together, divided by 14. The formula for this is, I'll do it over here, is capital T divided by little a times little n, which is 182 divided by 2 times 7, which is 13. Okay, so once we have all that stuff summarized, we are ready to move on to the basic ratios. I'm going to change color for this. We're ready to move on to the basic ratios. All right, so in the one-way ANOVA, there are 3 basic ratios. The first basic ratio is the basic ratio for y, which is basically the sum of the y squareds. So we're going to take each one of these 14 y's, square them, and add them up. All right, so we have 9 squared plus 12 squared plus 15 squared plus 14 squared plus 10 squared plus 11 squared plus 13 squared, and then we go right on to the second column, plus 0 squared, 12 squared, 26 squared, 3 squared, 13 squared, 14 squared, and 30 squared. All right, so we've taken each one of these 14 scores and squared them. And when we add them all up, and again, I encourage you to pause this and do it yourself. When we add them all up, the number that we get is 3130. Our next basic ratio is the basic ratio for A, and the formula for this is the sum of the capital A squareds divided by n. So again, I can't stress enough how important it is that you are using proper notation from the get-go. So if you use your proper notation over here when you get your column sums, then it's very easy to see what numbers go in here. Capital A is over here, capital A is over here. So we're going to take our column sums, square them, add them up, and divide by n. So our first column sum is 84 which is right here. We're going to square that, and then we're going to add our next column sum, which is 98, square that, and divide by our n, which is 7. Again, it's 84 squared plus 98 squared divided by n. And when you do the math on that, it equals 2380. And then our last basic ratio is the basic ratio for t, which is t squared divided by a times n. Capital T squared, let me make that clearer, capital T squared. And again, importance of notation, because capital T is right here. It's our grand sum. So our grand sum is 182. We're going to square that and divide by little a times little n. 2 times 7. And when you do the math on that, you get 2366. All right, so before we move on to the next step, some important checks that you want to do. Whenever you do your basic ratios, the basic ratio for y should be the biggest. And when we look at these three numbers, we can see that it is. Also, the basic ratio for t should be the smallest. And we can see looking at these numbers, it is the smallest. So this is a good sign that we're on the right track. The only other thing I will say is mind the formula here. So when we do our basic ratios, we're always squaring something. I've seen a common mistake that students make is they forget to square this t here. And I think the reason they do it is because if you look, the formula for y bar t is almost the same as this formula for the basic ratio for t. Formula for y bar t is t divided by a times n. Basic ratio for t is t squared divided by a times n. So just don't forget when you do your basic ratios, you're always squaring something. And a good sign that you've made a mistake is if you get down to your basic ratio for t and it's the smallest, but it's the smallest by a lot. So, we've got 3130, we've got 2380. If we get down here to the basic ratio for t and we calculate a 13, that number doesn't make sense. All the other numbers are in the thousands. This number should be smaller than these numbers, but not by that much. All right, so in the next video, we're going to start with the sums of squares.